I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. It's my honor to be able to be here with Shinzen to teach alongside and to be here with you. It's been a really powerful week for me, seeing folks adapt to this new retreat experience in a way that I didn't imagine was possible. And, when we began this idea of doing a virtual retreat, when suddenly, they shut down the Canadian border and it seems very much like our retreat might not be happening in person. There were doubts. Will this work? Will it be, enjoyable? That kind of thing. And it's working really well. I'm actually very, very surprised at how well it's working and how much it feels very much like a real retreat. So thank you for your practice. Thank you for your diligence and your dedication. And I'm very, very curious to hear the net result of how this goes. It's been such a joy working with each of you and hearing about how we can be helpful in a very complex time. And it's really nice to be able to be here and contribute a little bit of my own personal perspective and experience with this path and this process. Have some fun, say hello, and just be able to hang out a little bit. I think for me, mostly what I'm here to do is just do the thing I love the most and get to connect with you, talk about practice, the other thing I love to do the most right after practice. And just have a little bit of fun. So I was preparing for this talk, and in my mind, of course, the thought came up of comparison, which is going to be part of the theme tonight. And I thought, how do I do a talk just like Shinzen? What do I do? And thinking, like I've got to give this, perfect talk. And, it's funny because what I get to do is give my talk. And, a lot of what my mind will do is, what I like to say is put two pins in the ground. And one pin is in the present moment. And that pin, it's like who I am now. It's like, get rid of that one. I don't even want to think about it. And then there's this other pin that's in the ground that's someplace better. And if I could just get to that other pin, I could finally be free. I could finally feel okay. And in that moment, the pin was being Shinzen, which, it's, what's the Oscar Wilde quote? Be yourself. Everybody else is taken. So, and that's one of the lovely things about working within Shinzen's system, which many of you know, is that what Shinzen's effectively done is create this periodic table of all of the world's meditation elements. And then it's up to us individually as teachers, but also as practitioners to explore that in ways that haven't been done before. So it's really lovely to be within a system that's so creative and which allows such incredible flexibility. That allows me to practice now while I'm here talking to you, and allows you to practice right now while you're listening. And lovely. So what I wanted to talk about was this stickiness, was this tendency of our system, if left unchecked, to not like what's happening, what is actually occurring, and how what's actually occurring has the power to radically transform the way we relate to the world. And something that it's very strange to me. I still don't quite understand why it does work, but why is it that this particular moment, this one right now, is the doorway to being more free, being deeply free? And it's a bit of a mystery to me. But luckily my job is not to figure out why it works, but just to, let it work, let it do its job. And so this tendency to, we could use the words clinging and aversion, or leaning towards and leaning away, this tendency to want something that is not present or want something that is present to be gone or different. This is such a primal drive of human beings. And what can happen for me is I can get the sense that if I can just get rid of this tendency to want things to be different. I could finally relax, take a break. If I could just get rid of this clinging and aversion. Finally, if I was just the kind of person who didn't have clinging and aversion, if I could meditate and just accept my pain and suffering just with a smile on my face, then I would finally be happy, which, if you can maybe already see the irony here, but it's another set of pins in the ground. So part of my job is to recognize and explore the fact that this desire for things to be different is natural. It's a natural human instinct. It can be used well, it can be used poorly, but the key is to be able to see it, know its effects, know how it sort of feels, try it on, take it off. And I think part of the idea is to be able to take it off. Because, my experience is that like most people, I want variety, I want choice, I want to be able to pick things, I want to choose this and that. But strangely, when I get everything I want, I'm still not satisfied. And I figured out the exact reason why. Even when I get what I want, I'm not satisfied. And that's because there's always a new iPhone. And for me, that's enough to keep the system whirring, keep the system going. So I'm going to rewind quite a bit. So my background, I grew up on a little hippie farm, my family on this little hippie farm in Rhode Island. And there's many ways in which it was very idyllic. We'd run around with flowers woven in our hair. Clothing wasn't it wasn't even like clothing was optional. Clothing was like the awful thing you had to do when you needed to go into town to buy food. It was just everyone was yay, running around naked in the swimming pool. My big thing was I like to jump off things, and I had a hammer, which I thought was like a shovel, and I would just shovel at the ground. That was my big, way. So there was a way in which it was very idyllic. And there's also some ways in which it was very chaotic. And, a lot of turmoil in the household, a lot of, ups and downs, and the things that come along with sort of hippie living, with the, substance abuse and, just, hey, people trying to get along. But still, there was a lot of discord. And maybe that produced it, but I don't think so, because this seems pretty universal in my experience. But I had this sense that something was terribly wrong. Something was very, very wrong. And I didn't know what it was, but I needed to resolve that. And I was even from a young age, my story leads into, drinking beyond the point of it being, helpful or whatever when I was younger. And, even as a little kid, I think I was 5 or something like that. And I was I've got to get into this delicious, jar of candy, which in this case was the jar of children's Advil. And so I was I can't figure out this top. So I was very creative and persistent. So I was oh my goodness, I'll just chew through the side of it. I know how plastic works. I was just to get all those sweet candies. And so the system, this system, this body mind wanted a thing. It wanted something, and it had a very hard time getting out of that flow. And I grew up and I kind of got these 3 big tools that I think about. The 3 big tools that I used, not very consciously, not very well necessarily. One was being a punk. I liked, I liked skateboarding. I liked punk music. I liked, gangster rap. And I was I fancied myself a punk. The other one was what I now realize is feminism. I was raised effectively by all women in my family. And so that was very powerful for me. Maybe those two go together. Yeah, I'm going to say those two go together, the feminism and the punk rock. Next was using substances. By the time I was a teenager, there's a lot of pot around and stuff, so I'd smoke pot and, drink and this kind of thing. And that was a solution for me. It was a tool. And it was how I managed this thing that I didn't like this reality. This reality was tough for me. And, you know, it was a very colorful, you know, thing. There's like lots of bags, big garbage bags of pot. And I was like, yeah, like I'm 13. This is heaven. Now I think back and I see my 13-year-old nieces and nephews. And I'm like, oh my God. So it's like I feel for them. I just want to keep them safe. And the third tool was meditation. And of the three, maybe not surprisingly, the most durable of those three ended up being meditation. As a young kid, I got interested in, of all things, Korean Zen, and in particular, holding a koan. I would walk around and just hold this question in my mind and just experience the world as much as I could. And that was delightful. But there was still, it still didn't seem like the solution, but it felt good. It helped, it worked, but still there was something wrong. And I kind of went through my life, you know, kind of fighting. But there's the other side, which is the instinct, that instinct to change, to want the world to be different, was entirely wholesome. I saw things around me that were unfair, that were difficult, that were painful for myself and painful for other people. And I wanted that to be different. And that's a big motivator for me. That's why I teach today. Is I want things to be different. In particular, I want people to feel more free. And at the time, you know, I feel like I had maybe different sort of things. I had different things I thought were the problem. And I worked on trying to make those better. I had very poor execution, however. So I thought at the time that capitalism was a pure evil, just in its nature was pure evil. Okay, well, regardless of whether that's true or not, I don't quite believe that now. I think there's room for improvement, for sure. I'm understating that. But but as a young teenager, 13-year-old teenager, I thought that meant that the people who owned mailboxes, of all things, in my neighborhood and my nearby neighbors, they were the direct route to taking down the man. And, you know, it's just like stupid teenage, you know, vandalism. And I really thought that I was, you know, I thought I was like really, you know, fighting the good fight and like, you know, I was doing my part as like a, you know, 12-year-old, 13, 14-year-old. And, yeah, I really had a big fight in me. And I started making artwork. So one example, I want the world to change. The execution, not so good, pretty misguided. The impulse is wholesome. Hey, I want people to suffer less. But I think I did the opposite, you know, as a pretty naive kid. I went back to, you know, tell those people, this is in my, you know, when I was much older, tell those people and let them know and try to, you know, pay for whatever damage I had done later on. And most people were just like very friendly and like, I knew it was you. Like, just funny. So the other thing I like to do, which was make artwork. And I really loved that if I gave up in a certain way, if I just lend myself to this thing and really be with it, just, you know, it was one day I was in art school drawing, and all of a sudden I just tried to give myself to the process and say, hey, what if I just really, really pay attention to this line that I'm drawing? And suddenly this line with a pen just started to become and unfold into being more and more beautiful. And it was happening in front of my eyes, and it was objectively, I mean, as objectively as a line can be, it was objectively true. It was more beautiful. And I realized that there's a certain kind of concentration, there's a certain kind of aligning of the mind and emotion that suddenly can be beautiful. And in the parts where I wasn't trying and I just was sort of dialing it in, it was sort of looked crappy. And at that moment, it was instant. I was like, I want to be an artist. This is the thing that I want to do. I don't care about anything else. And that's what I did for quite some time. It's what I went to school for, went to college for. So for a long time, my practice was actually art making. I look back on it realizing that now. And I became very interested in a lot of theory, but the theory was interesting to me because it felt like the Zen. It felt like the material that talked about self, the experience of self being contingent, the experience of the self and world not being quite so well delineated as we're used to. And there was still this push and pull, though. So for me, the solution was, okay, I make artwork over here, and over here, the part of the solution was whenever emotions get too intense, I just drink. Problem solved. Emotions, drinking, problem solved. And that was my like toolkit. And this is my advanced toolkit. And then 9/11 occurs, and I was in Baltimore. So we're not terribly close. We're sort of near Washington-ish, whatever. But it hit me, and this is pretty universal in my school. It hit me so hard, and there was something about some communal self, some sense of us as human beings that I had never felt before until it was cut, until it was damaged. And at the time, I didn't know that it could get better. I didn't know that it had only been partially cut. Somehow, I had this sense that my entire connection to humanity was like, it was just like something was deeply, deeply lost. And my that was sort of the precipitation of sort of things getting worse and worse. And the reason I want to talk about that, or wanted to mention that, is we're in a very, very strange time. And people who were alive then, there's a lot of experiential comparison to what's happening now. This is a much more slow-moving process. But there's a lot of strange similarities, which I won't get into, but there was this really strong sense of connection with people in our country and the world. For me, it felt like everyone in the world. I felt more connected. And I think what's happening now is there's a way in which we're becoming more connected with each other. I definitely wouldn't say that the net balance of what's happening is positive. And every time I think about the positives, I sort of get this pang of guilt that, I should really be considering all the true pain and suffering that's occurring. And part of what, I think the flexibility of being a human has to be is that we have to be able to hold both. And so we're here. We're here sequestered in our homes. And the conversation that started with Shinzen was this thing about why is this, it's like people spend a lot of time trying to get themselves to a retreat. People spend a lot of time trying to get themselves to a place where they can, be and have solitude and contemplation and explore in this way. And so why is this so different? This is just, of course, there's, the direct suffering. Very important to consider. But most people aren't in the hospital. Most people aren't even know someone who's in the hospital. So, what about this is different? Then again, I was doing the math on this, and it's hard to hold. But if all the people who are watching this now, this video, sent this video out to every person that they knew, even the weird ones, like all the weird people on Facebook who like comment on something and you're like, whoa, like I can't believe that person's still alive, or, whatever. All of those people. This is a rough number. But that's the basic number that's roughly around the range of the people who will not make it through this particular crisis. So part of my job is to take that in. There's this lovely teacher in one of the meditation teacher trainings that I participated in at Spirit Rock, named Larry Yang. And he would say, and if I can get this right, the degree to which we are unable to take on the pain of the world is the exact degree to which we will deny that experience unconsciously when that comes to us in the form of a student. And that's tough. That means that for me and anyone who's trying to help people, part of our job is to know pain, know difficulty, to have a place in our heart for that, to do the mourning that's necessary. And I don't mean to talk about this in a very abstract way. I have, friends who are suffering this, friends whose parents are suffering this. I think some friends might be here who are having that experience. Raquel's cousin recently passed away from this. And they had a lovely minion for him, a virtual minion, and everybody, all of these people through all of these generations came on to a Zoom call, which we're all getting dramatically familiar with. And it was beautiful. It was very beautiful. And so part of my job, and I want to suggest maybe our job, that's the general implication, that our job is to be able to have the full range of this exploration. Full range. And winding it back in a little bit. So there is this tendency, though, that this has to be different. This particular moment isn't going to work. And you can figure that out right now if we just stopped. The system, in all of these little ways, wants to move forward. It wants the next thing. This is the subtle range, but there's also the range where it affects us personally. Personally, we have these things. Oh, I need things to be like this. If it's not like this, I'll be upset in our relationships. If this person isn't like this, everything's gonna be wrong. Socially, oh, I need to be in this group if I'm not, or I'm not liked by these people. Culturally, the culture has this sort of need to sort of push and pull in these ways. We need our culture to be a certain way, or, people are acting this way. I don't want them to act in that way. Globally, this is so much of our globe and our politics is people saying, you need to be different. And, again, sometimes that's wholesome. And what I'm pointing to is that if our only position that we have is that we need things to change, which is wholesome. Again, I want to be clear. If our only position is that we have to have things to change, it's not freedom. It's not like, oh, I get my choice. I get to, if I have all my wishes fulfilled, then I'll finally be free. And that's typically how people talk about and experience freedom. If I just had what I wanted, Shinzen spoke about this yesterday. If I just had what I wanted, finally, I could get rid of this stupid pin in the ground where I am now and get to this great pin over here with that brand new iPhone. And it's easy when the thing we want to be different is, we want a different piece of tech, or we want to be better meditators, or, maybe we want to be kinder to people. We want to help more people up the stairs with their baby carriages. It's all fine. But when the thing that we're facing is something inevitable, like sickness and death, it gets tough. And so on one hand, there's a degree to which we have to kind of accept that, pain and difficulty and suffering is within the ordinary range of human experience. We often treat it like, this can't happen to me. The mind does, but it's ordinary. And at the same time, know that there is a possibility to step off that train, step off the sort of prison, you could say, of having things to be different. They have to be different. And just noticing that the system always wants to lean forward, almost always. And then the moments when it doesn't. There's moments when we have this sort of connection. You can probably remember moments all throughout your life where suddenly there's this experience of connection, actual relief. And often it's the case because we're actually allowing ourselves to be satisfied, allowing ourselves to be present. I was talking with a couple of friends, my friend Alex and my friend Max. this is sort of getting to how do we deconstruct that tendency? Because, all right, I'll go back to my story about Alex and Max in a moment. But our system is hardwired to crave and cling, to project into a future, to protect this imagined or this hologram we call self, and allow it to pass forward in order to do the one thing that this entire system is set up to do, which is pass genetic material forward. But I don't always want to do that. I have lots of things I want to do. Sometimes I want to take a nap. My primary drive personally is not necessarily genetic transfer. But our system is designed for that. So the system doesn't care if I'm happy. It doesn't care if I'm fulfilled. It doesn't care if I have lovely connections in my life, or my wife is happy with the number of flowers that I'm buying. None of these things. It doesn't care necessarily. It has a primary drive, and all of those other things are basically up to me. It's up to us. So I was talking with my friend Alex and my friend Max, lovely people, and the discussion came up, which many people have, I'm sure, have had listening to this. We're talking about money and how strange it is that it's just this strange IOU, and how the whole banking crisis and all this stuff was just sort of a giant glitch, a giant rumble in the system of IOU. It's so strange. It's not even actually worth anything. And I was like, guys, I don't mean to break it to you. And they're like, oh boy, these are like normal friends. These are not weird meditator friends who are like, all into all the weird sides of meditation. And I'm like, hey guys, that money thing you're talking about, well, I hate to break it to you, but like every object you've ever come in contact with, every sense of self that you've ever negotiated, every relationship, every sense of the movement of time, all of those, it's actually, those are actually also just an agreement. Those actually are not real in the way that we treat them as real. They're as real as money. They're as concrete as money, which is to say they're quite concrete. You cannot go into a grocery store and be like, hey man, money's just a concept. Like, give me some bread. And they'll be like, oh yeah, sure. Like, nice abstract thought. You win. It's not really how that works. But there is a massive freedom in recognizing that this is a dollar is just a social contract. In the same way, our sense of self, our sense of world, maybe they're not agreements. I'd say more they're just habits. Habits of the mind, habits of doing. The system protecting itself, trying to generate itself and move forward to pass genetic material forward. So we have this one problem on one side, which is that there's this tendency to want things to be better. Sometimes it's really skillful. Sometimes it really messes things up. Personally, economically, all of these different possible ways of leaning forward, wanting, needing. I had my niece and nephew. This is one of my favorite stories of this. My niece and nephews, Itzel, Zeta, and Ezra. They were little kids, and I got to go visit them for Christmas. And if you've ever been in a house with kids in Christmas, there's something very delightful about it, something very nice and special. And so, Christmas, toys, the whole thing. And all the toys are there, and they're like, okay, kids, go for it. And the kids like go, and they're whoosh, tearing through the toys. Oh my God. It's like you put them into a giant, like shredder or something. It's just like things flying everywhere, whatever. And within the course of, 10 minutes or so, there was just, the paper settled and there's toys all over the place, and the kids are surrounded by toys. There's just toys left and right. And they're like, I want more. And my sister like naturally said, there is that not only is there no more, you are surrounded by toys. The thing you want is there. It's occurring. And the kids are like, ah, and that's me. You know what I mean? That's the way I relate to the world. The system will want something else. And so frequently, the thing that I actually want, which maybe is freedom, maybe is peace, the only outlet that I have to get to it is actually here, is this. And I can say that abstractly, but I think that if I were hearing this as like a teenager, I would say, oh, this present moment thing, this is great. I'm going to write this down. When I get home, I'm going to make a cool pillow. I'm going to get myself in a cool position. And then I'm going to have what this is all about. It's going to be great. And that's the case. You might already see the irony here. But it's not some other particular moment. It's this freaking particular moment. And the part of us that's leaning forward, or part of the part that's leaning forward, is telling us that, I'll touch into something very weird in the meditation realm, and the whole system will go blank. And usually someone will have to just say one word, and I'll remember exactly what I was talking about. So it feels really good. It's like, such a relief, the whole narrative system. I'm going to see. Where's Raquel? Hey, Raquel.
Yeah?
What was I just talking about?
You were talking about, like, okay, so there's this craving, and the only place to get satisfaction is actually the present moment.
Yeah.
And this present moment.
There you go.
Now.
This present moment. That's what it is. You get into weird territory enough. Shinzen is very good. I've seen him before. This is one of the first times I saw him. He's talking and sharing, and he's like, okay, he's talking about going into the void, going into not this, going into emptiness, non-existence experientially. And he's like, okay, this is my Shinzen impression. Okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going, and he starts talking. He's like, okay, the void is a blah, blah, blah. And he talks for like a minute or so. And he's like, okay, I'm not really sure what I said. I wasn't there. But I'm pretty sure it makes sense because my mind feels like I just made sense. And everyone's looking at me like it probably made a little bit of sense. And, what he said made perfect sense, but he dipped into the void, dipped back out. I don't have that kind of control at this point. I'll start talking about the void, dip in and be like, whoa, the entire narrative thing just went out the window. So thank you, Raquel, for reminding me. So what we have is this particular moment. And the mind, the part of the mind that, that tells us things are not enough will tell us, yeah, I've paid attention to this moment before. I've paid attention to the breath, etc. But I'm just going to get this list done. People have this experience meditating all the time. Early meditators, okay, I'm just going to sit down and meditate. Ooh, this thing I have to do, or the doing list. That's not bad. That's natural. That's the system, being curious, exploring. The challenge is if we can't step out of that, now we're in prison. So just allowing the system to ignore that part. Ignore the part that doesn't appreciate this particular moment. Not tomorrow, not when you're, going to your practice, but this particular moment, and not recognize that this is the only one we have access to. This is the richest possible experience. And there's a lot of ways to do that, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So part of the goal, part of the aim here, is to recognize when that leaning forward, that craving, what you call it, is wholesome. Again, all the parts of us are wholesome. It's often the execution. So wanting the world to be a better place, wanting things to improve at every scale. From, hey, I'm just going to straighten up my desk a little bit, to helping get nations to be at peace with each other, to carefully feeding a child, to listening to someone. Any way that we can go from where we are and improve that is wholesome in its nature, but the execution can get very funky. You know, I want people to be happy and connected, so I'm going to create a cult. You know, it's like, like, wait a minute. You know, for me, it was like, I want to have fun. I want to have a spiritual connection, and I want to like be relaxed. So I'm going to smoke pot. You know, it's like, you know, that was my way of relating to the world. So the drive is wholesome, and we want to recognize that, because wanting to get rid of the wanting, well, that's just more wanting. And the thing about wanting, this is one of those excellent things about this story about my nieces and nephews and on Christmas. Wanting, this is told to me by a monk and friend of this community, Soryu for All. Wanting doesn't care if we're happy. It just wants. And once we get what we want, it's just momentum. It just has its own momentum. Okay, yeah. I mean, how many times have you had this experience where you buy the new phone or you buy the new gadget? How many minutes does it take from getting it to being like, ugh, this thing? Ugh, God, it's like, whatever, just a piece of plastic or whatever. So quickly the mind just moves on to wanting something else. And we get this little rush, and we're like, oh, that must be it, and then goes away. So it's deeply unsatisfying. So how do we move to really deep, really profound satisfaction, fulfillment? Step one, I'm suggesting, first realize where the instincts and the drives are wholesome, helpful. Step two, realize where they're not. Any behavior that we have that we find is harmful to ourselves or harmful to someone else, any way that we think we could improve, and keep in mind this lean forward, this wanting the world to improve, this is generally, I'm just speaking broadly, that's what's called morality. That's what morality is, the instinct to lean forward, to improve the world. Our dog is named Sila, our new puppy, some of you know. And this is the Pali term, the ancient Buddhist term for morality, Sila. So it's wholesome, wanting this moment to be different, to move towards something more ideal. And I think that when it's wholesome, we're not denying this moment. I don't like this moment. We're actually starting where we are and maybe talking to someone and saying, hey, I'm so sorry to hear that. Maybe allowing the emotion to arise. Where we get in trouble is when we start to should. We start to say, this should be like that. And there's that, sort of corny saying where it's like, don't should all over yourself. I don't know if other people hear that. You hear that in like, recovery circles and stuff. I think that the form of that is where we take that pin that's in the ground, this current one, and just get it out of my face. And there's a kind of small but significant violence in that. And people often say, I'm really hard on myself. This is something I talk to students about a lot. I'm really hard on myself. And it's just that this particular moment, I want it to be different. The self that I'm experiencing now is wrong. And I know that experience a lot. I know it's very painful. Yeah. And stepping outside of that is actually possible. It's really, really, really possible. That's not to say that I don't want to create the impression, and I think the teachers can do this, is create the impression that they're like heavenly and above any, sort of pain or difficulty, etc. But there is a process of stepping outside of it. That process is called mindfulness. And I define mindfulness as Shinzen Young defines mindfulness in a very broad way. And it's not just like sitting down and watching your breath. There's a lot to mindfulness. I thought I'd just give an example of a place that it's been extremely useful in my life. Recognizing where there is harm in the way that the mind is working. So I had this experience with Raquel. This is earlier in our relationship, and it transitioned during our relationship. Raquel's my wife, if you don't know. And in the relationship, I would hug her, and the first thought would be, she's going to leave me. I would hug, she's going to leave me. And so I was like, this is really uncomfortable. This is a bummer. Talked about it with friends, talked about it in therapy, this kind of thing. And the mind just had this habit, somehow that was triggering right to she's going to leave. And through talking about it and then through practicing and notice, okay, what is that about? I noticed it's not the first thought, it's the second thought, the second experience. And the first experience is actually connection. The sense of connection triggers the next one. So I'd feel like an instant, less, a tenth of a second or less, connection. My mind would go, she's going to leave. She's going to leave. And something about that and seeing that, I recognize this pattern, generally patterns throughout my life where the mind would just sink on something. There it is. And I realized that my job was, and this is what I did through mindfulness, and we all know this is a skill in meditation, we're pulled towards things all the time. Okay, I'm paying attention to this, paying attention, and the mind naturally drifts away, and it's my job to gently, kindly, not abusively. I used to be very like, no, you're messed up again. Okay, I've returned back to this. So what I realized I had to do, or what I tried to do, which worked, was I would hug her. First, it would go to, she's going to leave. And it was my job to go back to the connection, because the thing that I wanted was right there. I wanted connection and was afraid I would lose it, but it was actually there. And so often, you'd be surprised. I mean, I'm surprised at how often it's the case that when I'm like, oh my God, I want this thing, or like, something's wrong, and the whole system's like gets revved up, that I actually have it right now. And so with Raquel, that transitioned, and through that process, through repeating that process over and over, at first it was like, she's going to leave. Then it was like, she's going to stay, but she doesn't love me. Right? So this is over several months, right? I keep doing the thing. It seems like the same thought, right? For a long time, she's going to leave, she doesn't love me. Okay, now it's, okay, she loves me, but she's going to stop. Okay, now it's like, she's not going to stop loving me, but she's going to die. Right? Same structure. The thought is the same structure, but it's changing. Then it's, she's not going to die, but she's going to be gravely injured, and harm is going to come to her. And then just through over time, coming back to the thing that was important to me, using these exact skills, feeling the emotion coming back, knowing what a connection felt like. It's primarily connection now. It's connection, that thought, fine, come back. I want to double check here. Okay, we kept having this thing with the camera froze, and I just had this fantasy that the camera froze like an hour ago. And so, and what I noticed over time was that thought, the structure was the same, but each time, each iteration, I was more connected with Raquel. Okay, she's not going to leave, but she doesn't love me. Okay, she loves me, but it's going to stop. Okay, it's not going to stop, but she's, so the same structure, the same fear, but it was working. And that's the thing that is hard to get across to people, is people say, yeah, okay, I paid attention to this moment. Well, now what? Well, I did it. I sat down and I meditated, but it's a numbers game. Over and over and over and over again. So finding out where it's wholesome, finding out where it's harmful, recognizing that we can develop the skills to not need to lean forward, to not need to get away from X. And this is the mindfulness. This is the deep transformational reconstructive experience of mindfulness. And for someone who hasn't experienced it deeply, it can seem very Pollyannish, like, oh, you're just going to transform and have this transcendent experience. And yes, I think having reality deconstruct itself to a flowing tapestry of overlapping layers that are usually referred to as senses, within which the experience of self no longer needs to rely on any kind of stability, where inside and outside break down and merge, where our sense of self is no longer dependent on how I imagine other people see me, things like this. Yes, that is part of the path, and it's an important part of the path. But it would be crazy for me to suggest or even hint at the idea that that movement is the movement. That movement is the thing we need to do, because it's part of the thing. In meditation, often my experience is, for a long time was, that the novelty, things being different, and discovering and taking things apart, this is the magic, because it's felt so new and it felt like transformation. This is the fundamental transformation. This is it. Having experiences that were far more, transformational and far more psychedelic than any sort of substance I've ever had a contact with, that kind of thing. That was when I got sober. It was like about 16 years ago, and I really dedicated myself to to growing and to trying to be a better person, to help people. I sort of thought that maybe that kind of exploration was gone. And that's what was so interesting for me about finding Shinzen and finding really deep meditation practices, because I could continue that down that line. And what I found at some point, I remember I was at a retreat, and I had this period of about, I can't even remember, it was like 9 months to a year, maybe a little over a year, where my experience was extremely, all I can describe it as is liquidy. There was no real center. There was, the sort of the equilibrium or the horizon was just gone. The sense of inside and outside were just like, everything is just a sort of sea of things changing. And at first that was very, 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 very uncomfortable. And then Shinzen kind of walked me through it, and he was just like, he mentioned the Leonard Cohen quote, which, if you don't know, Leonard Cohen is a very significant meditation practitioner, was actually studied with the same teacher as Shinzen, one of the teachers Shinzen studied with. And he has a quote which I think is very relevant for that kind of experience. And he said, "You either become the ocean or you're seasick every day." And that's what I had to do. I had to become the ocean. So, become this strange, experience of everything being very, merged and liquidy, this kind of thing. And at some point I went on a retreat with Shinzen, and all of a sudden I had these big waves of what I could only experience as normality. It was so normal. It's like, and I went to Shinzen, and I was like, "Shinzen, something's wrong." I was just like capture Shinzen in the hallway. Be like, "Shinzen, I gotta talk to you. Something's wrong. I keep having these experiences of normality. It seems so normal, seems so ordinary. I mean, I remember this. This is what ordinary was like." And I was like, "So what's wrong? What am I doing wrong?" And he was like, he basically just said one word, and he expanded on it later, but he ordered just one thing, and he just said, "You have to stop preferring." And what he meant by that was, I saw the novelty and the weirdness of that as the path, not recognizing that, okay, this is all this big liquidy sort of world, which we can, you can explore and have fun, and I think it's very fruitful. And when the world reorganizes into an ordinary self, which it basically always does, when it organizes itself into this thing that I call me for any given amount of time, it's the same material. And by having contact with both sides of this enough, it doesn't feel any less significant. Being here in contact with just the palpable sense of just the present is as significant as those very, very weird experiences, easily. So that's the mindfulness side, is to learn those skills, but also recognize our everyday lives. That is where this material really plays out. And so for me, what I'd like to say to sort of tie this together is that for me, creativity is the link between these two worlds. This deconstructive, mindfulness practice where we see our thoughts are made out of, mental image and mental audio, where that emotion is coloring our experience of the world. All these beautiful, beautiful, sublime experiences that we can have, that we are having. Even right now, even for a 10th of a second or a 100th of a second, it's there. Everything we need is right here. There's that world, and then there's a world of wanting myself, others, things to be better, maybe. And for me, the lens that really makes it possible for me to not deny this current moment is creativity. To change this moment in all of its complexity, all of its beauty. I have a student, very, very sweet guy, very lovely guy. His name is John. He's actually here on retreat. Some of you may know John. And before the retreat, John said, I'm not feeling so good. He's an older gentleman, and it's hard to breathe. Next time I talk to him, it's really hard to breathe. I'm pretty sure I have this. And, we're doing meditation to show him ways to breathe that weren't painful or causing him to, go into intense convulsion and coughing. I don't hear from him for a while. I want to make sure he's okay, or, etc. And then I see him, he's here on retreat. Very powerful. And again, this is a virtual retreat. And I realize that John has a ventilator. John right now has a ventilator. He's with us here. And is in the hospital. And it's a very vulnerable place to be. And so for me is to take that into my heart and let my heart go out to him, which it does. I'm really glad you're here. Let my heart go out to all the people here who are experiencing any kind of suffering, not just related to this. Anyone who's seeing this that has that difficulty, or who needs to bear the difficulty that they're holding for someone else. And the place where I can use creativity is in considering, just like with Raquel, the thing that I want is here. I can feel so disconnected from you. I can feel so disconnected from myself. And it's a habit. It's a habit that the system has used so many times, it's hard to break. But for me, it's to recognize that we're here together. We are here together. To cultivate that over and over and over. And we say, I'm here together, and the mind is very good at showing us contrast. Okay, we're all here together. Yeah, but come on. There's a screen. That doesn't count, right? It's the same thing as with Raquel. Yeah, but she's going to leave. Sure, back. We're here together again. And in that same way, cultivating this community, cultivating our relationship with each other. And in that way, letting the stunning beauty of being in contact with a living human body mind. I often talk about this, but, sure, life starts in the heat vents of the ocean 4 billion years ago, but we don't often think about this. We know about the movement, and it comes out of the ocean and, becomes a simple mammal and a complex mammal and, primate and, But we rarely think about the fact that this experience right here, this is the vanguard. It is the foremost point of an unbroken chain of life going back 4 billion years ago. And life expresses itself in all of these beautiful forms and tropical birds and beautiful plants and strange fungi. And this, right here, right now, is life as a verb, as an ongoing process expressing itself in the form of an ordinary human body-mind. And we get to participate in that, and we also get to shape that. And so my wish for you is just to have at least a moment to appreciate that beauty, the majesty of the human experience, and to feel the joy and the spontaneity of being able to shape that into whatever's important to you.